So welcome. I'm Tamara Sale. I'm the director of the EASA Center for Excellence.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Leticia Sainz. Right now, I am the program manager of mental health crisis services for Multnomah County. But before that, for a very, very long time, I was with EASA in Multnomah County, first as the screener and then as the supervisor.
Right. So we're always looking for opportunities to bring Leticia back.
You never leave EASA once you do it.
You don't, really.
It's true.
Literally, it's true. We keep hold of you forever. So we're going to talk today about...
Do you want me to forward for you?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Today we're going to talk about early psychosis and specifically about what the early signs of psychosis are, kind of what happens legally with people sometimes when they start to develop psychosis. We're going to talk about EASA and what EASA provides and our goals. And what I'm hoping is that at the end of the session that we will have a really good conversation and also be looking at opportunities for us to partner together going forward. Leticia is going to talk about how to respond effectively to psychosis when it occurs, and we're going to talk both about kind of prevention, kind of in the moment, and then after the fact when the person might have some legal charges and that sort of thing. And we'll also talk about some resources and opportunities. So welcome, and we wanted to kind of start off by introducing ourselves. So we already briefly introduced ourselves. I've been working for the Early Assessment and Support Alliance, or EASA, since 2001. Was probably the most exciting opportunity I've ever had. Prior to that, for the 10 years before, I was involved in the state NAMI organization. I was the state president for a couple of years, and so that's part of why I know a lot of folks. And I was also working on children's system of care and crisis services up in Clark County, Washington. So I've had an interest in this work for a really, really long time. Do you want to add anything?
Tamara's being really modest. She helped us start EASA. She, is EASA.
I am not EASA, however.
She is in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I will say that, as is true for a lot of people who are part of EASA, our life experiences inform our life work. And so for me, EASA was kind of a culmination of my own journey and trying to figure out how to be genuinely supportive to people who develop psychosis and schizophrenia in particular. So it's been really exciting to me to feel like we've actually got answers and we actually have some things that work, and so now it's like, okay, how can we make it work better and longer and earlier? But the thing that's so exciting to me is that I talk to young people who have been through EASA, and their biggest concern is how other people can find it sooner, which, having been part of NAMI for the previous 10 years, and most of the conversation being how do we make this horrific, traumatizing experience and series of experiences somewhat livable, actually talking about how do we support people to complete college and to go on to grad school is really an amazingly different conversation. And I'm going to be going to another conference after this where one of the co-presenters is an associate research professor who graduated from an early psychosis program just a few years ago. And so she's not only an early psychosis graduate, but she is absolutely a peer of everyone else in the room. And so to me, it's just really... There's been kind of a sea change, in how we think about psychosis.
Yes. So I will say a little bit more about myself. I'm a native Oregonian, which I'm really proud of. Not very many people in Portland can say that anymore. And in my clinical background, I'd always done work with young adults. I've always done work in the community. And when I came to the county, and I actually started in the mental health call center, which now I help run, I started to hear about EASA. And EASA was being developed in Multnomah County, and I was like, that is the program that I want to do. because it served young adults and also because it was designed to really serve young adults and families the way that I think just most clinicians know is the most effective, and kind of meets all the things that people say, like being client-centered and being flexible. Lots of programs say that. EASA, that's just like built into its bones. So I managed to worm my way into the program, first by just filling in for someone who was on leave, and then I became the screener, which we'll kind of talk a little bit about that role, but that's the person who really is the front door, who does outreach, who does kind of the initial assessments. And then I became the lead, and then I became the supervisor. And it was a very, very hard decision for me to leave, because EASA has always been one of my favorite jobs, definitely one of my favorite clinical endeavor. Now that I'm doing more leadership things, that's a little different, but it's also kind of forever changed how I work in the world, how I kind of envision the community that we serve. And I think the other really important piece about EASA, besides it being just this amazing early intervention program, is that the people who work for this program really understand like the developmental phases of young adults and what that world is like. I am very far away from a young adult, and every year that passes, I get farther and farther away. I have young adults in my life, as I know Tamara does as well in my personal life. Sometimes it's helpful to have that intellectual, oh, right, this is the development, this is what 18 looks like. Yes, they are behaving in a way that is preparing me to be ready to let them leave my house. That could happen tomorrow, and I think a part of me would be relieved. So I think that's this huge piece too of it's about kind of early intervention for psychosis for sure, but it's also about this particular phase in life, which is so challenging and so interesting anyway, even if you're not going through psychosis. So I'm really excited to be here today, and hopefully, we're kind of doing a hodgepodge. We want you to really know about the program, because that's always a mission of EASA. We want you to know some tangible kind of hands-on skills of if you're working with someone who's involved in EASA, who also has legal kind of involvement in one way or another. And we kind of want you all to know kind of a little bit what to expect if you're also working with someone who happens to be experiencing psychosis in the moment. So I think we were hoping to just go around the room and really quickly get a sense of who was here. If you can just give your name and kind of where you're from professionally or personally, that would be great for us to kind of understand who our audience is. Can we start with you? That would be great.
I'm a crime law reform advocate. I'm a member of the NAMI affiliate in Annandale County.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. We can. You're supposed to hold it like close to your mouth.
This, but not like that.
So my name's Kylie Yost, and I'm an attorney who represents patients in psychiatric hospitals.
I'm Chris Wheelwright. I'm a lieutenant with the Portland Police Bureau, and I'm assigned to the Behavioral Health Unit.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Smith-Daly. I'm team lead down at Woodburn Telecare, and I'm also the PSRB case manager there.
Hi, I'm Jamie DeRuyter, the administrator at Woodburn. We serve PSRB folks.
I'm Kevin Comiskey. I'm a sort of an emergency fiduciary from guardian and conservator from Douglas County.
Christy Howard. I'm a professional guardian in Douglas County and Coos County.
Greg Wynn, Department of Human Services. I'm an engagement specialist.
I'm Susan Madison. I'm also a native Oregonian, so woo-woo! And I'm from Ainsworth United Church of Christ. I have no idea if there are other church people here, but if you are, please come to me. And I started a mental health ministry at my church a couple years ago, and we meet the last Sunday of every month. It's mostly a support group, but it also is a lot of resource sharing and that sort of thing. Really glad to be here.
Awesome. I'm Jessica Clark. I'm a psychiatrist. I see patients at the OHSU HIV Clinic and Snake River Correctional Institute. I also do private forensic consulting. And I'm not a native from Oregon.
That's okay, too. It's okay.
I'm Deb Allison, and I work at Pacific University's Student Psychology Clinic. And I just want to learn more about the resource so that we can teach them what resources are available.
I'm Kevin Rowell. I'm with the Oregon Public Safety Academy, and I'm one of 2 mental health program training coordinators at the Academy. And we train all police, corrections, parole and probation dispatchers in the state of Oregon, along with doing program development for CIT programs around the state.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, I'm Jeff Howes. I'm with the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office. For the last 5 years, I've been the second in charge to District Attorney Rod Underhill. Thanks.
My name is James Brown, and yes, I feel good. And I'm a therapist for residential treatment down in Curry County, serving PSRB clients.
My name is Nan Whitaker Emmerich. I'm a retired marriage and family therapist, and during my private practice, I saw a number of families with young people who had psychosis and thought that there were very few resources for the families. And I'm currently a teacher at a Buddhist monastery, and we end up with people who come and experience a psychotic break while meditating and need to know more and more about that.
I'm Jeff White. I too am a native Oregonian. I'm representing the Central Oregon Health Council in Bend, which is the CCO for Deschutes, Jefferson, and Crook counties.
Hello, I'm Nicholas Bouquet, a doctoral student for occupational therapy at Pacific University, as well as an EASA client, former client, and graduate. But I also made mistakes, and I am also a PSRB client, and so sort of walking the line of how do you go through psychosis, how do things happen, how do you recover from that, and I think EASA and Tamara really understand how that's possible.
Hi everyone, my name is Kylie McDermott. I am also an occupational therapy student at Pacific University, and I'm working with Nick on a project involving the criminal justice system and mental health and the implications of occupational participation for that.
Hello, my name is Margie Palmatier, and I'm a mental health therapist at NARA Northwest.
I'm Kenny Roders, LPC. I'm the PSRB supervisor in Columbia County.
I'm Christopher Wilmeth. I work over at Yahoo. We co-founded a neurodiversity group, and we're kind of seeing what we can do about mental health from kind of a corporate perspective if we include a lot of the things that we know about it from just as members of the general public and incorporate that into work. Just make work easier for people who have mental differences.
Well, that's hard to follow. I'm Miriam Williamson. I'm a criminal defense investigator and mitigation specialist. I work mainly with folks who are potentially facing the death penalty, but I also do some juvenile resentencing cases. And I don't think I've ever had a client that hasn't had some kind of mental health issue.
I'm Sam Lewis. I'm the program coordinator with Columbia Community Mental Health, and we do have an EASA program that we've been running for several years now.
I'm Ashley Noseworthy. I'm a social worker with the Forensic Assertive Community Treatment Team that serves adults with psychotic disorders.
I'm Lisa Rose Gagnon. I'm the intake advocate for Disability Rights Oregon, specifically for the PAMI, now the Mental Health Rights Project, and traumatic brain injury part of our program.
And I'm Emily Cooper, and I work with Lisa. I'm the legal director of Disability Rights Oregon, and I'm from Seattle, and so everyone can boo and hiss now.
My name is Howard Marlow. I work for Voice of Problem Gambling Recovery as a gambling recovery mentor. There are only 3 of us in Multnomah County. I also work for Mental Health Association of Oregon, the Older Adult Program, and I'm a peer wellness specialist, and there are only 2 of us in Clackamas County, both new programs.
I'm Kat Griffin. I work at the Public Defender's Office down in Roseburg, Douglas County. I am assigned to the treatment courts. We have a drug court, a mental health court, and a domestic violence court. I'm also on the behavioral health subcommittee of our local public safety coordinating council.
Hi, I'm Shaolin Vek. I'm an attorney at PSU Student Legal Services, and we represent students with a variety of legal issues. And we see, we do domestic violence, sexual violence, stalking, but also a couple of criminal things. And there's always intersections with mental health and the legal system. So.
Hi, I'm Amy Boyvin. I work at Johnson Creek, and that's with PSRB clients in Clackamas County, and I'm the therapist there.
I'm Jeffrey Anderson. I'm a psychologist with Clackamas County, and I supervise our urgent mental health walk-in center in Happy Valley.
Hi, I'm Natalie Pate. I'm the education reporter with the Statesman Journal newspaper in Salem. I'm not planning to do a story today, so no worries about being quoted or anything, just trying to get a deeper understanding of the subjects.
The 5 of us are all psychologists at the Oregon State Hospital, and we're in the evaluation department. So we deal with a lot of legal and mental health intersections. So this is Dr. Leeper, Dr. Ingram, Dr. Prokosh, Dr. Glass, and Dr. Stokes.
Hi, my name's Greg Tompkins, and I'm from Yamhill County, and I have a special affinity for all of you guys that are Native Oregonians. My family stems from an 1847 very first wagon connection, and my roots go back 7 generations in this state. So I have all you guys beat, but I still love the Native Oregonians. And I guess I had political roots back in the days, too, and that's kind of coming out now that I'm doing a lot better. So thank you all, and I'm feeling honored to be here. Bye.
Hi, I'm Denise Kepper. I am not from Oregon. I'm from Arizona, so no native anything. I'm a prosecutor from Columbia County, and I am working on the new JRI team, which is the Justice Reinvestment. I'm also the prosecutor assigned to all the specialty drug court, behavioral health court, and vet court, and also working to get up a program for the pre-sentencing investigation program as well. So essentially anyone who everyone thinks should be going to prison, but we're looking at other alternatives. I'm handling their cases.
Hey, I'm Lizzie McKenzie, and I do admin at Northwest Forensic Institute.
I'm Jack Hochek. I'm a retired psychologist and administrator. I'm also a person with lived experience, and had EASA been around when I was young, it would have been wonderful, because I spent quite a chunk of my lifetime hiding and avoiding because of stigma, and these days facilitate hearing voices groups, that kind of thing.
I'm James Hudson. I'm a mitigation specialist. I do the same thing as Miriam. Just to maybe explain a little further, we help collect all the evidence, contact all the witnesses, help identify experts, and prepare for sentencing in capital cases. So that's kind of what we're kind of the attorney's foot soldier for that second trial if they are convicted of aggravated murder.
I'm Lynette Hamilton. I'm a clinical forensic psychologist at Northwest Forensic Institute here in Portland.
Pamela Buchanan. I'm a forensic evaluator in private practice.
Shankaram, psychologist at the Oregon State Hospital on the Sexual Offending Treatment Program.
Hey everybody, I'm Stephanie Wickman. I'm a clinical social worker, and I work with Center for Discovery. We treat eating disorders here in the Portland area. Thanks.
I'm Lindsay Widmer. I am a peer recovery specialist at the Oregon State Hospital.
Daniel Counts. I'm a service disabled veteran, and I work with peer recovery services at the Oregon State Hospital.
I'm Rick Snook. I'm also at the Oregon State Hospital.
And how many of you have had direct involvement in one form or another with EASA? Okay, so yeah, it's like 50-50 maybe. So feel free, to ask questions as we go, or to share additional information if there are things that we might be missing, because one thing about this work is that you kind of have to know everything, but you never do. So collaboration is incredibly important. I suspect you guys probably feel that way in your work as well. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Perfect. All right. What is EASA? Look at that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So EASA stands for the Early Assessment and Support Alliance. We were created in January, the first week of January in 2001, as a 5-county effort to change the way services were delivered to people who were developing psychosis in our 5-county region at the time. We were called the Early Psychosis Program for the first week, and we immediately changed our name to the Early Assessment and Support Team. And then in 2007, the legislature started to fund a dissemination effort, and so we had a big debate about the name and came up with the Early Assessment and Support Alliance. So all of the programs around the state share that same name. And so I'll talk more about kind of what exactly we do, what our goals are, and what we offer. So we are statewide at this point. As of this year, officially every county in Oregon has an EASA program. Now, there are some programs that are a little farther ahead, or a lot farther ahead than others, and some that used to be really going well and now have kind of slipped back. So a big part of my job is working with programs to kind of keep that momentum going, kind of keep that developmental progression happening across the state, and to make sure that it's really widely available. So the idea behind EASA was to change the way that mental health centers and that the community in general responded to people who were developing the early signs of psychosis. And we're specifically targeting schizophrenia and bipolar spectrum psychosis, although we certainly get a lot of different scenarios referred to us. So most of the time when somebody's referred to EASA, we actually don't know what's going on, and that's part of our job, is to help figure out what's going on and to figure out whether EASA is the right fit, and if it's not, we also try to really proactively link the person to services that are appropriate. That's actually led to some really interesting program development, and in Deschutes County in particular, but also there are several other regions. The legislature has funded not only EASA, but then a transition age youth infrastructure, where we're starting to try to create like a no wrong door type approach for people. And I'm really excited about the work that's happening in Deschutes County in particular right now, because I think they're really starting to kind of figure out how to make sure that people can get services as quickly as possible. So the idea, again, is to get to people as quickly in the process as possible and to engage with them quickly and effectively. So the analogy that I use for psychosis is that if you think about the standard of care in the world, and you think about, say, people who are in wheelchairs, right? If you set up a program designed for people in wheelchairs, and you put it on the second story with stairs, no elevator, no ramp, and no outreach, that is the current standard of care for schizophrenia and psychosis in the United States today, right? So who's going to make it in the door? What's your thought? Nobody. Actually, they do make it in the door. And you know why? Who gets them there? Family and police. That's it, exactly. So it all depends on how strong those family members are, or how severely they've had a negative consequence. And so that's what we're trying to change, so that that's not required. One of the first things we say to our clinicians when we're training them is that there are certain words that we never say in EASA. And let's see. The first set of words that we never say in EASA is, there's nothing we can do. We never, ever say those words. We also never say, You have to wait until he or she is an imminent threat to himself or others. We never, ever, ever say those words. What we talk about is what's going on with this person, what do we know about this person, what's motivating this person, what are this person's strengths, how can we engage with them proactively so that they can feel a sense of trust with us and actually want to talk to us. And if there's a situation going on that's unsafe, we will facilitate an involuntary commitment if we need to, because that's our highest priority, is to make sure that people are safe, but also respected and given the opportunity to share their voice and participate in decision making, even when they're being involuntarily committed. You know, I mean, people still have moments of choice. They can still participate in decision making, even when they're really, really psychotic. And so we try as best we can to engage with folks at that level. We also are very focused on families. So often it is that family member who's calling. And so the young person may be saying, there's no way that I'm going to get help. And the family is kind of desperate, trying to figure out what to do. We will problem solve with the family. We will strategize with the family. We will talk to the family. We won't share any HIPAA-protected information that we're not allowed to share with them. However, there are so many things that we can share, and we can strategize with them without ever violating HIPAA. You know, so we try not to allow HIPAA to become a barrier while also obviously respecting the law. So we have what we call an extended engagement process with EASA. So that means that if a person is referred to us, they don't have to immediately sign up for services. In fact, we kind of expect that a lot of people who are referred to us will not actually think that they need mental health services when they're referred, because they have psychosis going on and they think something else is happening, like, you know, people are shape-shifting or whatever. And so they don't see that as a psychiatric condition. They see that as a potential threat to them, or, you know, something strange that's happening. So we try to engage with them in a way where we can use their language, where we can, you know, where we can be a supportive presence for them. One of my favorite stories, and I try not to go too long here, but one of my favorite stories is a young man who was co-training with us. So we often use folks who have been graduates from the program to teach with us. And he described his experience as going into a cave. And he actually was experiencing the future and the past as being reversed. Which for him was a really, really fascinating experience that he actually didn't really want to give up because it was kind of cool, you know. But the way he described it was that he kept going deeper and deeper and deeper into this cave until finally his flashlight went out. And all of a sudden, somebody like EASA showed up with a flashlight. And he said his first reaction was relief. And his second reaction was, what are you doing in my cave? And you know, as we talked to each other, you know, what I described was, you know, what actually happened was your family called because they saw you going into the cave. And we've been with you all along, talking to you. You just haven't noticed that we were there. And when the flashlight went out, that was the moment when you noticed we were there. And for some reason, you kind of were like, okay with us. Like we hadn't, like, you know, traumatized you or, you know, made you want to run away from us, you know. And that's kind of a common experience, that sometimes it takes people a while to even realize that we are there with them. I often hear people's stories kind of kicking in about 6 months after we actually met them. And that's just kind of what happens with psychosis. Yeah.
I'm going to go a tiny bit off script here, but I wanted to just say, as we're getting started here, just a small comment about language, which Tamara's kind of referring to as well when we do outreach. And this presentation is very clinical in nature in terms of the terms that we use, how we're talking about things, because EASA is a clinical program and a lot of us are clinicians. But I also just want to acknowledge that a lot of what the language here, people have a lot of different names for what we describe as psychosis. People have a lot of different names and descriptions for what we're going to describe as like delusions or auditory hallucinations. Those are all very clinical terms. We're aware of kind of their pejorative and stigmatizing and labeling history, and yet it's kind of the language that we have at our disposal. So I just want to make a note that that's here. It's not, when I'm talking to a young person about what they're experiencing, when Tamara's talking to a young person about what they're experiencing, this is not the language that we use. We use language that is reflective of what they're experiencing, what's going on for them, how they're describing their experiences. So I just wanted to add that in there. It's not, this is not like a common language presentation. And I know there are people in the room with lots of different experiences. So we have to pick some kind of language, and we kind of went with clinical, but that's not necessarily the best or the way that it should be, or it's certainly not how we would talk to young people.
Right. And I think that's a really important point, because we're very, very careful about how we use language in our program. We're very careful about how we use the word psychosis. We're very careful about how we use the word schizophrenia. And the reason for that is that people often have connotations associated with those things. And so we have to kind of uneducate people sometimes from the negative beliefs that are out there. Because obviously there's a lot in the environment that's really, potentially damaging to your sense of identity. And we're actually very, very concerned about people's sense of identity. We don't want them to integrate negative beliefs about a condition into who they think they are. We want them to come up with what we called a shared, empowering, explanatory model. So what we're trying to do is to get to the point with them where they've got a way of talking about it, where they can communicate with other people, they understand the clinical terms well enough, but they also kind of have an idea of how to manage their own condition. So we work with people. Once somebody is in EASA, we work with people typically for a couple of years, and then we have leadership and other opportunities that are longer term, where some of the folks who have been in EASA kind of really stick around. I'm still in contact with some who graduated in the early 2000s, and I still get calls, and we encourage that. That even though people have graduated, that we may still hear back from them. We see them as a resource, and we encourage them to see us as a resource as well. And sometimes we struggle with that a little bit in terms of how to structure it and that sort of thing. But there's a very clear intent around that. So EASA provides a whole host of things. So the first thing is community education, and so every organization that you belong to, if you would like us to come present to you, whether it's at your workplace, your church, the school that your kids go to, we don't ever turn down an invitation, ever. So we will come to you, and we will be so happy to do that. Both to educate you about psychosis and who to refer and that sort of thing, and then also to think about how we can link together to pursue our common goals. We provide a lot of consultation. So if people think there might be something going on but they're not sure, we encourage them to call, and we'll talk it through enough to figure out what's happening to the degree that we can. So I get a lot of calls from people who even will start off saying, I know this is not psychosis, but I actually don't know what to do. We really aspire to have a strong, supportive consultation presence in the community. One of my favorite stories is a guy down in Salem donated a whole series of, donated multiple thousands of dollars to the program because he was so satisfied with how the program screened his kid out. To me, that was yeah, that's what we're aiming for. So we try to have a very strong linkage to crisis response. So if somebody in this room were to refer someone to the crisis system, hopefully they're going to get to EASA pretty quickly from the crisis system. So we recognize that at the point that people are referred, they're usually at their highest level of acuity for the entire course of their illness through their lifetimes. So that first period of weeks when somebody has just developed a psychosis, they're at really significant risk for all kinds of really bad things happening really quickly. And so we try to respond very quickly, and we also try to make sure that we've got a really solid link with our mobile crisis outreach or our crisis teams. Family support and education is absolutely central. So we use an evidence-based, throughout the whole process, we try to use evidence-based practices, and we use a particular family psychoeducation model that has a lot of evidence associated with it, and it's, it really both educates families and kind of teaches them skills, and then also provides the opportunity to do ongoing problem solving and to develop support. So we can do it either individually with the family or we can do it in groups. I just met this just last week with a group of family members that actually know Leticia because they used to be her multifamily group and now they still meet, and they don't seem to think that they are ever going to stop meeting, and they're now helping us design our new statewide family council. So yeah, so that's, we're trying to create social supports for people that last beyond the program. Again, I mentioned proactive outreach and engagement. That's true throughout the program. So we don't expect that people will necessarily want to come to us. We do a really comprehensive assessment. Strengths assessment is actually an absolute core element, but also risk assessment. And when we talk about risk assessment, we're not just talking about kind of the typical risk assessment about suicidality and, threat to others. We're looking at, do you have Tylenol in your house? We're looking at what are the delusions that this person is experiencing, and what do they feel like they need to do in response to those delusions? We're looking at, is this person getting manic, and are they about to walk barefoot to Oklahoma with no ID? So those are things that are not suicidality. They're not necessarily aggression, but they are very much of a threat to them. So we try to be much more thorough in how we think about risk assessment. And then ongoing treatment planning, very much person-centered. And then, the ongoing treatment process with a really strong focus on relapse prevention. So hopefully most of these folks will have some kind of crisis plan, some kind of relapse prevention plan. And if the person is involved in the court system, we will go to court with them. We will work with attorneys. If they're having difficulties with school, we'll go to school with them. We'll work with the school counselors. We will work with whoever is in their life and whoever should be in their life to try to provide advocacy, support, education for everyone involved.
The other thing about EASA is EASA considers family what the young person considers family. So that it does not have to be biological. It does not have to be, it is literally whoever the young person says, this is my family, that's who we consider to be their family. And, in terms of, just to give you some examples of like the outreach and engagement that we do, when we're in the screening process, or even when someone's come into the program and we're just trying to do engagement with them, that means if they're okay with it, us coming to their house, spending time with them. There was a young woman who I was screening who I probably spent 3 months going to her house and doing craft projects with her. I'm not exaggerating, for that long a time. She was not a client with the program. I had done my screening assessment and found that she was eligible to be in our program, and she was very hesitant to be part of it. So I would just come and spend time with her. Sometimes it would be like 2 minutes, and she would be like, get out of my house, and I'd be like, okay. That's the other part of engagement with EASA, is that sometimes backing away is engagement. And that's a big part of respecting someone's no. When they draw a hard, bright line and say, no, 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 we respect that. And sometimes that's part of engagement, because in a lot of cases, people, if they've been part of the system, if they've been in the hospital, that no has not necessarily been respected. So, we will fall back. We'll still do outreach with the family. We'll still wait for an opportunity. And really, what came with this young woman is eventually she needed something that I could help her out with. And it wasn't so much that she was like, "Ooh, I'm going to be part of mental health treatment. That sounds awesome." But it was like, you could give me a ride to my lawyer's office and you could help me, kind of navigate the system that I need help with. That was our in. And so part of it is kind of being there in the cave, as long as someone's okay with that. And then when the opportunity presents itself to be the flashlight, EASA really tries to do that within reason. There's a lot of flexibility there, but that is, in my opinion, that kind of like ethic and value that we bring to the program and the way that we do outreach and kind of how we do that with young people is part of what makes this program really special.
So our model is team-based. It's very similar to the assertive community treatment model that you guys are probably, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. Jack? Yeah.
Is a person required to have one of those two diagnoses, or can they be experiencing psychotic versus some other etiology and still qualify for services?
Yeah. So we have a lot of people who come into the program with a psychosis unspecified diagnosis. We also serve a group of folks who come in under a clinical high risk category where they don't have a diagnosis of psychosis particularly at all, but they have what we call attenuated symptoms. So those are, they might be starting to have hallucinations or starting to have these kind of weird ideas, and they know there's something wrong. They haven't lost touch with reality yet. And we'll take them then, and they don't have to have a diagnosis. Now, the main thing is trying to identify if it's trauma or if it's maybe a head injury or like a medical condition or depression. The treatment that the person needs may be different than what EASA provides, and so we want to try to make sure that they're getting appropriate treatment. So that's really the primary reason. Also, the research behind EASA came almost entirely out of the schizophrenia research field, where it's focused on kind of what works with folks who have a long-term condition where they have to manage psychosis. And so that, some of those things may not be true for a person who is just having psychosis as part of an acute depressive episode. So we want to make sure they get on antidepressants and they're getting treatment for depression, but they may not actually have to manage psychosis in the same way that someone with schizophrenia does. So that's kind of our rationale. Although, again, the legislature a few years back said, well, wait a minute, we need to make this type of support available much more universally. And so they actually allocated a bunch of new money to try to make that happen. So I think that, and I hear that a lot from the mental health centers that, these practices really just make sense. We want to do a really good strengths assessment. We want to, work with families. We want to be proactive, so there are a lot of elements that that carry over, and especially in rural communities, we're really starting to try to look at, okay, maybe not just thinking about a team, but really thinking about what does your whole agency do and how do you integrate these things is just standard practice. But the tricky part is the intensity of the program, because we shoot for an assertive community treatment level, which is about one staff person for every 10 to 15 people in the program. And so that's a pretty intensive level that costs a lot more money than, seeing them once a month. Mm-hmm.
I know it's early assessment, but I mostly work with older people. Mm-hmm. And do you have like an age limit or anything like that?
Yeah, we do actually. And so, I think this is an area where we may need to think as communities about expanding what we're doing. it's focused on a particular developmental time period, which tends to be the time period when people develop schizophrenia. So, we're focused primarily on ages 12 up to about 27. Our programs really, a lot of them officially say 25, but the age range is actually considered to be a guideline and not an absolute strict barrier. We do sometimes provide training and support for programs that are working with folks that are outside of our population. So in terms of, how do you work with psychosis and that sort of thing, that might be an area where we could potentially collaborate. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. No. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So if you're going to talk about it, then
so let me get through the who EASA serves part, and then I think we're going to answer these questions. So absolutely, that's it's a public health model. So the idea is that they do not have to have any insurance at all. We take private insurance, we take OHP, we take no insurance. One of our goals is to eliminate all barriers to entry. So whatever it takes in terms of changing billing practices or changing the population that the mental health center serves. So a lot of these mental health centers don't serve this population except for EASA. But if a person is experiencing psychosis and it's consistent with a schizophreniform or bipolar spectrum psychosis, they qualify for EASA. It's kind of that simple. And that we serve people through a team that includes mental health clinicians, psychiatry, supported employment, and education. And one of the standards that we have in the program is that needs to be available from day one. Nursing, occupational therapy, and peer support. Now, not every program has all of these elements. There are different levels of capacity in organizations, and occupational therapy and nursing sometimes are very hard to recruit for. So we're aspiring to have all of these elements in every community, but there's certainly many communities that don't have 100% of them. They all have the first three, and then our goal is for everyone to have all of them. Again, we serve people regardless of insurance, and we talked about the age range. We are looking for folks who have developed the condition within the last 12 months. Now, that means at a diagnosable level. So, a person may have had symptoms going back for a really extended period that we might consider kind of part of the prodrome or the onset. So we encourage people, if there's any doubt, to go ahead and call us. And then even if they're not appropriate for EASA for whatever reason, we may try to connect them to some other care. And again, just like with the age range, the 12 months is also a guideline. So there are times where programs will decide to take exceptions. And Leticia and I have been involved in a few of those over the years. I'm like, okay, this person doesn't quite live in Oregon, but they have a house here.
I never remember that situation.
Yeah, right.
Do they have an address in Multnomah County that you can give to me, please?
Yeah, we try to be very, very flexible. And then also, because we have this network of programs all across the state, if they're going to college someplace, we have an agreement across all the programs that, let's say that a person is living in St. Helens and then they go to Eugene to go to the University of Oregon, our Eugene team will pick them up. And the family can also continue to receive family support in Columbia County, and also if that person comes back, like during vacations and that sort of thing, the Columbia County team will pick them up. So we try to be very, very flexible, not just individually within the programs, but across the whole state. Okay. So talking about psychosis, again, we do a lot of community education, and one of the things we talk about is that this is incredibly common. Now, we're focused on people who are developing it for the first time, so that's about between 1.5 and 2.8 per 10,000 per year. Okay, so that's not as big a number, but over the course of a person's lifetime, 3 out of 100 will experience psychosis at some point in time, and about just under 1 out of 100 is schizophrenia, and bipolar tips it over to closer to 2, and then there are a lot of people who experience psychosis for a lot of reasons. And this number is actually kind of probably pretty low. I've seen as much high as 5 to 8%, but I tend to go with the more conservative figures. And the onset is normally during the teenage and young adult years. So that's why it's so critical, because people can totally lose their entire life trajectory as a result. They can drop out. If they don't get the right help, they're likely to drop out of school. They may end up never being employed at all. And we are trying to support them to get through all of their developmental milestones. That's our goal. Okay, so we talked about, and when we talk about psychosis, we're going to talk more about what some of those specific symptoms are, but the bottom line is that people are experiencing them as real. So it's important to understand that. Like, if I'm hearing an auditory hallucination, I actually am hearing something that sounds like your voice, or sounds like a voice, or something that's very, very real. And so, often people will say, well, that's a symptom. But if you were to say to me, that chair that you think you see is a symptom, well, what would you say if I said that to you? Yeah. You say, it's real. What are you talking about? And then if I persisted with that, you wouldn't like me. And you might think I wasn't looking out for your interests, right? Because I'm negating your clear reality. All right? So that is how people experience psychosis. And their natural tendency to go in and say, that's a symptom. You need to get on medicine. And by the way, you're going to have to stay on it for the rest of your life. And you have schizophrenia. And people will almost always say, oh, that's the follow-up. Yeah, once you take the medicine, then I'm gaining weight. But if they've even gotten to that point, most of the time they just say, I never want to see you again. And the only reason that they're seeing you is because they're being forced to, right? And then they gain weight. And so as soon as they're not forced to anymore, they're ready to stop. And so we want to prevent those adversarial experiences early on so that people will actually choose to participate in treatment rather than feeling like it's a threat. Okay. We have till 9:30.
All right. I'm going to start moving a little faster because I want to leave you all time for questions. No, it's fine. Tamara and I get excited about EASA, and then we tell stories. And so, again, this is the perfect slide when I was just talking about language. But this is the clinical language to describe what we would describe as psychosis. And keep in mind that psychosis is the general constellation of these symptoms. It is not equal to schizophrenia. Psychosis can be caused by all kinds of things, just like if you had a stuffy nose and a sore throat and a little bit of a headache. Like, do you have a cold? Do you have allergies? Do you have the beginnings of something else? So psychosis is that. It's the constellation of symptoms. A lot of people kind of totally equate it with schizophrenia. That is not the case at all. And so, this is kind of the list of symptoms. I think the sensory overload piece is very important to remember that when this is going on in someone's brain, their brain is on overload in general. So any kind of sensory information, whether it's light, sound, kind of emotional intensity, which I'm a very high emotional intensity kind of person. It isn't always necessarily a negative thing, but I talk with my hands. Usually I have a lot of bright colors on. Like, I can be a little overwhelming just in like who I am. So sensory overload is a very important thing to remember when someone's experiencing this. Their brain is already on overload. So if you come into the picture, either even very energetically, like high, joyous energy can be just a little much. So lights, all of those things that you think of when you think of senses. So we have a lot of things in common with the legal system, safety being kind of one of the most primary ones. But also for those of you who are in the legal system or who work with the community, I think a lot of people understand, and people said this in the room, a lot of people who have interactions with the legal system also have mental health challenges, unfortunately. So we all have an idea about, that we want people to be in treatment if that's where they belong versus incarcerated. And that especially for young people, at the beginning of people's lives, we really want to prevent people having something on their record that is going to be, I think, people in this room, especially those of you who do advocacy, know that this can really stand in the way of the basic things that we need as human beings to be happy and to survive: housing, jobs, meaningful employment. And so we really want to work to mitigate that as much as possible. And if someone is involved with the legal system, that, we want to help them get to court and kind of, fulfill their conditions of probation or whatever it is, to try to kind of move through that system. So this, I think Tamara spoke to this a little bit, like there are different kind of themes and qualities of psychosis that sometimes can speak to what's causing the psychosis. This is pretty general and broad. It's not always true for all, people and all experiences. But this is one of the ways, just very broadly, that EASA, and again, this is when someone's part of the program. The front door of EASA is not diagnosing people, and the purpose of EASA is not to diagnose people, except when it's helpful, except when it makes sense, except as a way of kind of trying to conceptualize what might be the best treatment for someone. But, again, the quality of psychosis with schizophrenia can look different than the quality of psychosis with mania. Mania has a lot of energy behind it. Schizophrenia sometimes has less energy behind it and more disorganization. Depression is when someone is severely depressed. That also might kind of elicit psychosis. And the psychosis when someone is severely depressed is, not surprisingly, going to be having qualities of depression. Very often it can be voices telling people that they're horrible and that they stink. That kind of makes sense. Psychosis has its own sense to it. And there's a lot of great work to be done to work with the experience of psychosis with someone, because it often has meaning that is maybe not, totally, you can't totally tell until you kind of delve into it with someone. Drug-induced psychosis sometimes can have more aggression associated with it. This is kind of one of my soapbox things. I feel like people really get misdiagnosed, and then people think that people with psychosis are violent, and it makes me so upset. It makes me actually a little violent and aggressive when people talk about that, because I think it really, it increases the stigma, and it increases this idea that like somehow people with schizophrenia or people who experience psychosis are dangerous. And people who experience schizophrenia and psychosis are more likely to be a victim of a violent crime than to precipitate one. So if people are experiencing psychosis and also really aggressive, again, this is not hard and fast. You all could probably tell me anecdotes of people who, that are outside of this. But in general, there's often a substance-induced component to the psychosis. PTSD can be a trigger and can kind of be a cause. And then, medical, there's lots of medical conditions, occasionally a medication. There are different conditions that people can experience psychosis, and this is just kind of a short list of them. So there are lots of different experiences that people have and kind of scenarios that people experience. And I think part of the purpose of these examples, obviously experiences are really varied, but you can imagine how frightening it would be if you thought that someone who you loved and trusted, your parent, was inserting thoughts into your head. You can imagine how that might affect your housing and your stability if you were living with this person. And even if you weren't, if this was someone who you had a really, really strong relationship, just how frightening that would be and how it would just shake your worldview. And as Tamara said, this is reality. And that's the way that EASA approaches it. It's not, our job to try to talk someone out of the fact that their father is inserting thoughts in their heads. It's our job to be there with them and to be like, this is really freaking intense and really scary, and we want to try to help you feel safe and try to, at some point over the long term, try to mend your relationship with your father, who now you're terrified of or don't want to be next to or whatever it is. Again, with the math teacher and potentially believing they're shape-shifting, like that's going to affect someone's ability to go to school or want to take math. or you might have some kind of unusual behavior in that classroom because this person is really freaked out by their teacher. So, and with auditory hallucinations, which are incredibly common and kind of command auditory hallucinations, there are different scenarios and opportunities for people to experience what it feels like to have auditory hallucinations. And I would highly recommend, if you all are working directly with people, especially, that you check them out, because like literally putting a headphone in your ear and having someone talk to you that you can hear, or multiple voices hear, telling you to do the same thing over and over again, it is an experience unlike any other. And like I said, I recommend it, if nothing else, to kind of just understand that's what people are experiencing, and it's a very hard thing to combat. Command auditory hallucinations in the general community also freak people out, because people assume that the auditory hallucinations are saying bad things. But they can be everything from like, wear the color blue today. I've worked with young people that had command auditory hallucinations that kind of quote unquote like more small life decisions were kind of like part of their directive all the time. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something violent or bad. Sometimes it can seem mundane is kind of the wrong word, because they significantly affect people's lives, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a really intense command, if that makes sense. So in terms of legal involvement, I would say in Multnomah County, the biggest legal involvement I would see would be trespassing and potentially like violations on like TriMet of various sorts. And also, because we have an airport in Portland, a lot of airport kerfuffles, which thank goodness they were traumatizing for the young person for sure, and also like so many more serious things could have happened. Like imagine like a really disorganized someone who's not quite experiencing reality going to the airport with like no identification, like trying to like get on a flight somewhere. Like that could potentially go very, very badly. And so those are kind of the main contacts that I've seen. Like I said, a lot of the time, and this is not true of everyone, people in the room kind of spoke to this being otherwise, but a lot of the time it can be misdemeanor crimes, things like I said about trespassing or loitering, and then just, if you can imagine being really disorganized and not being able to follow traffic laws, and potentially if there is a belief that's focused on someone else, sometimes it can involve usually not violence against someone else, but bizarre enough behavior in relationship to the other person that other person is uncomfortable about it. And that, so I think that's, like I said, generally the broad strokes of what happens with people. Obviously, all kinds of unusual things can happen to people depending on what is going on for them inside their head. So initially, especially when people are first come into the program or doing screenings, a lot of what EASA does is kind of gather together the community around this person. And a big thing about EASA that is transferable to any kind of care, really of any kind, whether it's mental health, physical health, substance use, it's really about that person's community. Like EASA isn't going to be around forever. And even if we were, people's quality of life is about the people around them. And EASA is just one piece of that. So having people in your life, protecting those relationships, getting support from family and friends. And a big part of what happens in our system, besides the kind of individual people not getting great care, is we don't give enough support to family. And like I said, family, I mean that as broadly, whoever the person considers to be family. And then families get burnt out because this stuff is hard. And sometimes it can be cyclical, and you have to deal with a system, of which I am a part of now, the crisis system, that says you do have to be in imminent danger. If you have someone who's 18 and over, they do have to be in imminent danger to be able to access certain levels of care. And so, giving a lot of support and education to family and friends is crucial, because they hopefully are going to be in it for the very, very long haul. And they're the people that make life meaningful to the young person, not their treatment providers. Like in a perfect world, at least, that's, people, that's how it would work. So EASA really tries to understand kind of history and patterns. A lot of the EASA work is like, we're like little curious detectives. We try to not take anything for granted. We try to not make any assumptions about what we've seen before, and really let the young person and family lead us with what's going on, how can we help, what's happened in the past, what's been helpful in the past. So I think I talked a little bit about some kind of typical legal scenarios. Of course, the other contact with the legal system can be things like civil commitment. So it doesn't necessarily always end up in a criminal way. Sometimes the other contact is with that piece of the law. So when someone is doing very, very poorly, when you're working with them and you can tell that they're actively in a spot that you're not sharing that spot with them, your view of reality is not their view of reality. So, what I said, there's always some kind of meaning and logic to it. Again, there's a lot of sensitivity to verbal tones. There's going to be their brain, all kinds of things are going on in their brain that are kind of behind the scenes. So you may need to wait for a little bit more of time to kind of help them, give them time to kind of think about what you're saying. And if there's threatening behavior going on, it's usually either, again, this is very broad, either drug-induced or because this person themselves is feeling threatened. And you have to understand that not only because psychosis involves paranoia, like legitimately, but also because this stuff is terrifying, especially if you're experiencing it for the first time. It is really, really no joke. Like, this is a very, very intense experience for people. So people are usually pretty freaked out, especially, like I said, if it's their first time. So do really good communication with the people around them and kind of do a plan that, of course, is going to be flexible and change, but a concrete plan. I think the police maybe call this like a tactical plan. Chris, is that true? Yes. So, it's going to be concrete and potentially down to the detail. Like, I'm going to go and talk to this person. If X, Y happens, this is going to happen. This person's going to be in charge of this. Again, it's going to be flexible and change over time, but you want it to be organized. Create space for this person, move slowly. This is a lot different if I'm approaching Tamara than if I'm like this with this person. This parallel space is where you want to be with someone, and maybe even potentially over here. So you want to be less confrontational, in a space that they and you feel safe. And, don't go into someone's space unless they let you go in there. I'm supervising someone with EASA who she's standing in a person's doorway. This person, every time this clinician comes to see this person, the young person says, "I don't want to talk to you." And then they talk for like half an hour. But she does that from his doorway. She does not come into his room. He's already said, essentially, he doesn't want her there and allowed her to be there. So she is walking that line right there with space. And she and I had a really interesting conversation yesterday about not going into his room and like kind of the pros and cons of that and what would maybe allow her to step into his room. Like, what would be the invitation that would allow her to do that? So CIT training, which is, Chris, crisis intervention training. Portland police are all CIT trained. A lot of them are ECIT trained, which is enhanced crisis intervention training. In Multnomah County, EASA in Multnomah County has a long and very great history of working with the Portland police that has been very, very helpful to young people and families. We did a training video back in the day for Portland police officers, and there's just been a very nice kind of relationship between Portland police being aware of EASA, making referrals, but also in times when family members are calling the police a lot, or when someone's kind of out and about in the neighborhood and the police are aware of it, like working with EASA clinicians to kind of do the least traumatizing, best kind of outreach for the young person. And this approach is really much more about, even with law enforcement, it's really much more about using de-escalation and verbal techniques versus use of force. And that's a complete oversimplification of it. But I think there's this idea of law enforcement officers having more tools in their toolkit to use and taking a little bit more time. Chris, okay, thank you. Thank you, Chris, for backing me up. So your communication approach should be just a little bit more chill than you typically would be unless you're already super chill. I have to take it down a few notches because I am not already super chill. So, and I'm really in the moment, super attuned to that person, being very concrete, kind of saying one thing at a time. And I always, always, always go for the emotional response. Like, if someone is like, "Do you believe me that my dentist put implants in my body, in my teeth to track me?" if someone asks me that overtly, I'm never dishonest. I'm never like, oh yeah, I totally believe you. If I don't, I just say like, I'm not sure. Like I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but I do know that thinking or, feeling like you have implants in your teeth must be horrifying and potentially physically painful. So I always kind of go back to the kind of the emotional experience of where someone is at. And if someone really wants to talk to me about what's going on for them, talking to people about their psychosis does not make it worse at all. But it's like you can have some productive conversations and connect with people about what they're experiencing. It's like anything else. I mean, if someone came to you and was super depressed, would you avoid talking about their depression with them? No, right? So, look for ways to kind of reassure them. I can't tell you how many times I've said, like, what can we do to help you feel safe? What can I do to just help you feel a little bit more calm right now? And then within reason, we try to do it. So, peanut butter cookies. That sounds delicious. But yeah, we are very creative around like, can we just, are we gonna go get some coffee? Are we gonna go, meet in a space that feels comfortable to people? I think the other thing about the parallel thing is we do a lot of like work with people in cars. And if you have any young people in your life, just in general, the car is a great place to have conversations because you can't look directly, hopefully you're not looking directly at them because you're driving. But, so you're in this parallel space with them. It's a much more comfortable place for people to be able to kind of express themselves and talk to you. Or, you can turn on the radio or just have silence and go for a drive. And that can be really comfortable for people as well. We do a lot of drives and a lot of time in the car with the young people in EASA, and it's very effective. So this is, again, the cycle of psychosis. This is very, very overly linear. And also, again, very clinical. But in general, like Tamara mentioned, the prodromal signs are kind of the very beginning that something that may not be okay. And the interesting thing about the prodrome is that people still have the ability to say, this isn't real. It's one of the hallmarks of the prodrome. So unusual things are happening. There's usually more visual things that are going on during this time. And people are maybe a little bit freaked out about it, but it's kind of, hit and miss. And so it's kind of, in a perfect world, EASA would be catching everyone in this time and doing some work with them. Treatment during this time looks a lot different, and EASA has a model for it. There's obviously a lot less medication use. This is very, very much an at-risk time. And lots of people experience this and then go on, and then nothing comes of it, too. So it's not a guarantee that, full-blown acute psychosis is going to happen. So when and if acute psychosis does happen, it's what we talked about. And there is, in that stage, there is no ability to say, oh, this isn't real or this is real. So if that's what you're driving at, you're basically just going to alienate the person, and that's going to kind of be the end of it. It's not going to be very successful. So early recovery, when things have started to kind of just come down a little bit from the most acute phase, it looks a little bit more like the prodrome. And this is the phase where people are really struggling to kind of make sense of what happened and kind of integrate it a little bit. This is where you might begin to start doing a little bit of reality testing if that's where that person is. And this is where people are at high risk for depression and where you want to really look at risk of suicide. I think, again, it's like any early beginning phases of like the recovery from like a major illness where people are really trying to grapple with, what does this mean? What does this mean about my identity? What does this mean about my life? And unfortunately, in our culture, if they've been in the hospital, there's a good chance someone has said to them, you're really sick, you have schizophrenia, you're going to be disabled for the rest of your life, you're going to be on medications for the rest of your life, like, best of luck to you because it's totally going to stink. So, and most of the time, that's not the only time people have received that message about having something like schizophrenia or, something like bipolar disorder. So there's a lot of work to kind of make sense of it, including potentially just being like, this isn't me, this is never going to happen again, I want to just forget that ever happened. That's all very typical, both for young people and any of us who have had to face something that you're like, this might potentially really change the course of my life. So a lot of this also has, for the young person as well as the family, an element of grief and loss. And that's really important with recovery and with the work that we do. we all know grief and loss looks very different in people, and kind of what that looks like for people. All the different, there's all kinds of research and work on grief and loss, but keep in mind that that's integrated into this as well, because this is a big upsetting of the apple cart, as it were, and families feel a certain kind of way about this as well. So that's part of early recovery. Sometimes that's threaded kind of throughout the entire work. And then in later recovery, especially as people start to become more and more stable, there's a lot of work that EASA does around relapse prevention. So we look at what's going well, what's helpful, what would you like to continue. Physical activity, physical activity, physical activity. So important for mental health. Find something that you love to do and then do it on a regular basis that raises your heart rate. That's super, super important. But I think, young people create their own relapse prevention. I've decided that I'm going to only smoke THC or use THC once a month. They don't say THC. You all know that, right? Yeah, that's me saying THC. I'm only going to do dabs every 6 months. Thank you. We do a harm reduction model for EASA, especially in a state where marijuana is legal. So a return to kind of what we describe as the new normal. So things are different. This big thing has happened, but we're kind of going back to what the new normal is going to be. And, later recovery doesn't necessarily mean that there are no symptoms. It means that the young person and the family feel like, okay, this is somewhat manageable. And again, people can kind of go, especially between acute, early recovery, later recovery, I wish that everything was like this, but it's more kind of back and forth, generally, hopefully making progress forward. So we want to respond effectively in terms of prevention in the moment and follow-up in terms of, prevention and the treatment that EASA provides that's more prevention-focused has a very different look than someone who's acutely experiencing psychosis in the moment, and we need to kind of help them get safe and kind of help them get to a place, really it's all about safety, them feeling safe and kind of general safety as well. And then the follow-up, EASA is very, very up in people's business if people let them. So that means, within under a week of seeing a psychiatrist in Multnomah County, we have a system that's a little unusual where you see the psychiatrist first thing, which is great because if people want to be on medications, then they can do that right away. I would say about 30% of the people who see our psychiatrist aren't on medications. They're just kind of seeing that person is an extra expert in the team and to kind of help them out. We have that is up to young people as to whether or not they take medications. And we have a model that's very, here is a novel concept. When people tell us they're having side effects they don't like, we believe them. When someone says I have a rash all over my body and it's because I started Seroquel, we don't be like, you know what? People don't get rashes on Seroquel. And we know you're kind of crazy, so we just aren't going to believe you. I'm saying that as kind of tongue-in-cheek, but literally those are people's experiences in more typical mental health settings. So when people say, this is happening to me, we realize that drug testing is so limited and that it's their own body. And we're like, Seroquel isn't working for you. You have a rash all over your entire body. I don't think that's ever happened. Seroquel doesn't cause rashes. Is anyone here? No one's here from a drug manufacturer, right? Anyway. Oh, yes. So the bottom line is we pay attention to rashes. I've had a rash from penicillin. It was not fun. But I was believed because, penicillin does cause rashes and because my doctor didn't realize that I had mental health challenges. Okay, so are you going to? Dang. All right. So, I think I'm just going to kind of go through. We're almost here to the end, and I want to leave time for questions. But this is what we do around prevention in the program. Always doing prevention every moment of EASA, even if things are perfectly calm and stable. And in the moment, when someone is not doing well, again, we're kind of working with the team, working with their family, and kind of just trying to do the best kind of crisis planning that we can. It's the fact that EASA as a team is amazing. The person who responds to a crisis might be the peer person because they have the best relationship with the client with backup from a QMHP. So that team approach is very helpful because the support employment person might have the best relationship with the client. That happens all the time because they're getting them a job and actually doing something helpful. So after after something acute, again, if you are in the legal system and there is you have someone who's working with EASA, you are in luck because EASA is amazing. So like reach out to that team, get a release. EASA can help you, help get the person to court, do things like that. They're a very, very collaborative team with external partners. So count yourself lucky, get a release, and do some good work with them. So here's a list of resources, and I think I busted through the end quickly enough that we have some time for questions. And of course, we'll stay as long as people, well, I'll stay. I'm volunteering you too. Tamara likes to talk. We all like to talk about EASA. All right. I'm going to start over here.
Hi. Great presentation. Thank you. I wondered what your direct contact has been with attorneys, either on the prosecutor or the defense side, and if you think they're missing something, or is there something, or if you've had any, real negative experiences, what do you think needs to happen on either side there?
Yeah, we definitely have direct contact with attorneys frequently, and it's primarily around trying to understand kind of what that person needs. I don't know if you have any. I would say
that we're very spoiled in Multnomah County and other counties that have mental health court and things like that. We've had really, really good experiences working with the DA and kind of getting people, the legal stuff mitigated. I would say with attorneys, in terms of often, I'm trying to say this diplomatically, lawyers are really busy, like public defenders are really busy, understandably so. And so I think sometimes that's the challenge of getting the time to connect. And so I think that would be my feedback for especially public defenders. And I hate to say it because I know how busy they are and the good work that they're doing, but there just isn't always enough time. And EASA is going to be eager to connect and try to kind of work and help and, with a release kind of try to help the defender or the public defender understand the context of it. So I would think just, making that connection, and maybe not with the lawyer directly, maybe with, someone who's working in that office. But that, to me, has always been the biggest challenge, is just not enough time to connect.
So I don't know if I can articulate this, but is the treatment and how does EASA, because this is a law and mental health conference, how does EASA approach if a person commits a crime and they're insane, they don't know right from wrong, how is that different from a person who commits a crime and is not insane and does know right and wrong? Like different, same crime, but different, I guess, intentions or ideologies? Right. Yeah. And how is the rehabilitation different and the treatment different?
I think I would say probably the treatment isn't actually different, but the advocacy might be. So, particularly as you get into issues of background checks and that kind of thing, where a person might have PSRB involvement, often employers don't really understand the difference. And so, I think this is not actually necessarily my area of expertise as much as some of the other people in the room. And I kind of think that's what this whole conference is about, right? So, yeah, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on it.
Tamara actually comes to the Peer Support Council, which every month it's composed of graduates who've been through EASA. And so not only does she talk at the systems level, but she actually talks with the clients monthly to gain input and insight into what it's like to be in the system, what it's like to, and I know you have personal, not to give away too much, but you have life experience.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is a really important point, that we do have a young adult leadership council, and we're always hearing from people who've graduated about kind of what issues they're running into, and the issue of background checks, the issue of being on PSRB and people not necessarily understanding that, discrimination generally in higher education and employment, housing, comes up pretty frequently. And so Those are areas where I feel like we've only really just started to even have the conversation, little less to actually create the kinds of changes that are needed. So that's part of why I'm hoping that we will kind of come away with some new partnerships where we can work on some of these things together. And then the beauty of it is that we do have that young adult voice as well as the family voice really solidly at the table. So we can be informed by those experiences, because we have these amazing young people who've graduated from college and they're looking for jobs, and they've got this thing on their record because something happened before they went to the hospital, and how do they address that? I think that's something that's why we're all here.
I would say, and I know we have another question too, but I would also say that, Nick, because of people like you, because of anyone in the room who has spoken up about their own experience or someone they loved, I mean, that's how we combat stigma. It's been researched. That's just how we do it. We do it through storytelling. We do it by saying, I'm on PSRB, I have schizophrenia, and I am, going to school to be a psychologist, and I love to ride horses, and I play music, and so on, so on, so on. And I think that is how we change the system. And the legal system is, the challenge with it is that it is set up in a way that is not about treatment. And so I think hopefully that's why we're all here, to try to make those changes. And like I said, that the power of doing it is through people speaking up and saying, this is who I am. And thank you to everyone in this room who does that, because that is how we are changing the system. And I just think that takes, I know that it takes a huge amount of bravery to tell someone who you want to be your employer, to tell someone who you're in love with, whoever it is, to be honest about that part of people's experience, because there is so much stigma. So thank you, everyone in this room who's doing that.
If you want to exchange contact information, we can follow up in more depth in some of the questions that you might have. So, for example, the one about what are attorneys missing, I'm thinking that'd be a great one for us to send out to the listserv, come up with a list and send it to you, because, Okay.
I was just curious about the average length of treatment and what transition typically looks like from EASA.
So typically 2 years, and then transition starts in the beginning, but it lasts for at least 6 months. We try to make sure that the person is solidly connected to ongoing supports before they're transitioned out, and then we try to be available after. But honestly, it is something we really have to work on more. I don't think we're doing as well as we need to. And like Leticia said, we'll stick around, so I know people need to get going, but